And we're trying to chart a path to a Kings victory sans DeAaron Fox. And to help us do that, we're going to have Chris Biderman of the Sacramento Bee joining us now. You can check us out now on youtube.com/Sactown Sports 1140. You can watch Chris there. Chris, thanks so much for hopping on, man. How are you? I'm fantastic. How are you guys?
Doing terrific. Figuring this out as we go.
DeAaron Fox, doubtful to play. Do you what are the chances in your mind that he actually suits up for game 5?
Yeah, I would say something like 50-50, right? I mean, you remember when Domantas Sabonis suffered an avulsion fracture to his thumb. He missed one game and then was back. So, I think there is an element of maybe gamesmanship when it comes to listing off these injuries. And I think that the Kings, of course, are going to continue testing DeAaron and see how he is at practice today before making any decisions. But I think, it would be 50-50. It's obviously a huge game. But the Kings do have the benefit of tomorrow's game not necessarily ending their series. Even if the Warriors do come here and win, they still have opportunities to win in Golden State and game 7 back in Sacramento. So it's obviously a very important game, but it's not going to be the defining game of the series potentially. So, I think ultimately it's going to be 50-50, and we'll have a better idea today after practice in a couple hours.
Yeah, and we're, like Kyle mentioned, we're trying to figure out that path to success for Sacramento. And if DeAaron obviously can't go, is there any strength that you feel like the Kings can lean into without DeAaron in the lineup that they can maybe take advantage of?
I think it's, without DeAaron, it's going to be about 3-point shooting. Like, I think it would have to be one of those games where the Kings just shoot 55% from 3 and ultimately have that carry them. I think just given how valuable Fox is to the offense when, schematically the Warriors are taking away dribble handoffs or making things difficult on Domantas Sabonis or taking away the other outside shooters with their ball pressure and defense on the perimeter, then Fox can just kind of do his thing and take somebody off the dribble and go score. When you don't have that, then it becomes dependent, I think, largely on 3-point shooting. Like if the Kings have gotten a lot of good looks this year or in this series, and they've just not made many of them, with the exception of game 4 when they finally made 40% of their threes.
Right.
But if they, I don't think there's a world in which they win game 5 without a hot shooting game from the perimeter. If Fox isn't out there, and unless maybe Malik Monk has 35 and maybe Davion Mitchell scores 17 points, and maybe you get the random Trey Lyles 18-point game where he hits 4 of 6 threes, right? Like there are certainly, you go through the Kings season and you could find different games where you get the Trey Lyles game, you get the Malik Monk game, you get a bunch of bench points, you get a bunch of random performances, and then it's like, the Kings are pretty deep, right? And that's been kind of a theme from the season, but it hasn't really been that way for the playoffs, particularly games 3 and 4 in Golden State, where you didn't get a whole lot from those ancillary players on the road. And obviously the adage is, in the playoffs, your role players play better at home. So that's what benefits the Kings here a little bit, the fact that game 5 is at home, and they might be able to get better scoring performances from some of their ancillary players. Perhaps Keegan Murray has another good game where he scores 20 points. Maybe, Kevin Huerter, he's going to be huge. I think Kevin Huerter is probably the biggest indicator when it comes to how game 5 is going to go. If he's not hitting threes like he hasn't in the playoffs, he's 3 of 21, I think, something like that, from
14%.
Yeah, which isn't great. Obviously, a guy who shot over 40% from 3 during the regular season. So if Kevin isn't hitting threes, then I think the Kings are obviously going to have a hard time. But if he does hit threes, I think that could open things up for everybody else, because the Kings already have gotten a bunch of good looks from 3. So that to me is going to be the defining factor of the game. If DeAaron Fox doesn't play, can the Kings hit enough threes to keep up with the Warriors?
Talking with Chris Biderman, covers the Kings for the Sacramento Bee. And Chris, I went into this game before the DeAaron Fox injury. I was thinking, hey, maybe they make a switch and take Kevin Huerter out of the starting lineup. He only played 21 minutes in game 4. They had a really quick hook. But now it looks like Davion Mitchell is going to have to go in for DeAaron Fox. Is that the only change you see to the starting lineup coming?
Yeah,
Fox is out.
probably. I mean, maybe you try Malik Monk, but I don't know. I think you might see the bigger changes would probably come at the back end of the rotation. I know Mike Brown had mentioned that Kessler Edwards was going to get some consideration, and I was a little surprised Edwards hasn't played more meaningful minutes through the first 4 games of this series, just because he gives them a defensive element that they don't really have. I thought, maybe in game 4, had Keegan Murray not come out and played well offensively, then Mike Brown would have said, well, if Keegan's not hitting shots, I'm going to try to get more on the defensive side by putting Kessler Edwards in his place. But that, obviously Keegan had a really good shooting game and perhaps broke out of his slump. So, but I think at the back end of the rotation, it might be something like Kessler Edwards just getting more time, because he's somebody, when you're playing the Warriors, Kessler Edwards can probably guard 1 through 4 and maybe even 1 through 5 if Draymond's on the floor instead of Kevon Looney. So I think that defensive versatility could be an adjustment that the Kings go for. But in terms of the starting lineup, I don't know that you really tinker too much beyond just inserting Davion Mitchell, because Davion played really well at the starters all year, and that was I think the Kings' second best lineup statistically from a net rating perspective was Davion with the starters. And so that's not a foreign lineup at all for those guys. And so I think they feel confident that they can operate at a pretty normal level with the rest of the starters.
Yeah, Chris, you mentioned Keegan Murray there and his huge performance in game 4. How important is it for the Kings now, especially if they don't have DeAaron Fox, for Keegan to have that confidence and to find consistency in these remaining games?
Yeah, I think you can make a case that Keegan Murray is the Kings' best shooter, right? Like, and I think that he's showed a little bit more confidence as the season went along, that hey, maybe he can get to his mid-range off the dribble. He's probably not a great finisher at the rim yet, but he can get to the mid-range, and we saw that, and we obviously know how impactful he can be when him and Domantas Sabonis are working the dribble handoff game as effectively as they have all season. So I think that was really the big takeaway, or one of the big takeaways for the Kings coming out of game 4, was just, okay, Keegan Murray got going. And like I said, the 3-point shooting is going to be a huge determining factor if DeAaron Fox can't play. And I would imagine that Keegan Murray is going to lead the Kings in 3-point attempts, right? Or at least be up there, top 2 or 3. So yeah, it's really important. I mean, the Warriors don't have, if there's an area to attack the Warriors, it's probably on the wings, right? They're a guard heavy team. They have Andrew Wiggins, but aside from Wiggins, it's not, and I guess Draymond Green, they don't have a ton of like long athletic perimeter defenders, right? So that's given Keegan is 6'8", 6'9", and can shoot, can put on the floor a little bit. He potentially poses the Warriors a matchup issue that maybe nobody else on the roster really does, unless you get a hot shooting night from Harrison Barnes, which we haven't seen yet this series either. So I think Keegan Murray is along with Kevin Huerter, those guys are probably the 2 biggest X factors in my mind going into tomorrow.
Chris Biderman, Sacramento Bee, covers the Kings, joining us now. We've talked a lot about Domantas Sabonis and how he needs to be the team's MVP moving forward if they do have to finish this series without DeAaron Fox. What adjustments does he need to make to be more effective?
Just needs to be more aggressive, I think. Needs to be more aggressive and more decisive. The Warriors are obviously allowing him to shoot from the perimeter whenever he wants, and the perimeter shooting numbers have not been good, but he's just got to let it fly, because I think when the Kings prioritize or emphasize 0.5 basketball, right? And that's, when Mike Brown's constantly talking about 0.5, it's when you get the ball within half a second, you know exactly what you're going to do, whether it's dribble, pass, or shoot, right? And what the Warriors are kind of doing is, I think, is sort of a mental mind game with Sabonis. They're letting him have all that space in the mid-range, and it's forcing him to think, and it's taking the Kings out of sort of that 0.5 offense, right? So he's thinking, oh, do I shoot it? Do I set a screen? Do a dribble handoff that the Warriors are playing so well? Do I try to take advantage of a potential mismatch I have by dribbling into the post?
Right.
And it feels like sometimes the Warriors are inviting Sabonis to dribble into the post by, there are instances earlier in the series where like Moses Moody was switched on him, or Jonathan Kuminga switched on him, and they're like, yeah, take advantage of this mismatch, dribble in a bunch of times, and then it really stalls out the Kings offense, and then the Warriors just end up collapsing on him and making it difficult on him to spray the ball to their outside shooters, which is obviously such a big part of their offense. So I think Sabonis just needs to be decisive. If he's open from 17 feet, take the pass and
Yes.
shoot it. Just
Yes.
go up. Don't think about it.
Yeah.
Or if he's not going to shoot it, like go catch the ball and then go do your dribble handoff, set a screen. I think his screening has probably been the best thing he's done this series because he hasn't been scoring as effectively. And obviously Kevon Looney is sort of matching him rebound for rebound. So, I would say for him, just being decisive, being aggressive, because he has to play with more force than he did, particularly now that DeAaron Fox is potentially going to be out.
Chris Biderman does a great job covering the Kings for the Sacramento Bee. Thanks for joining us, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yep. Talk soon.